My parents said, "We can't afford your tuition this semester, try again next year." I nodded and took up 2 jobs to help out. But at my shift at the diner, I saw my brother celebrating his admission to an Ivy League with my parents. They toasted with champagne. I froze when I heard my dad laugh. "At least one of our kids is worth the investment." I'm Soraya. I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, in a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath house that looked nice enough on the outside, but inside it was a slow-burning mess of favoritism and resentment. My parents, Martin and Yvette, were high school sweethearts who married young. Dad worked for a regional insurance firm, and Mom stayed home until my little brother, Julian, turned 10. After that, she worked part-time at the local library. We weren't rich by any means, but I never thought we were struggling. I was always a good student. Graduated high school with a 3.9 GPA and got into Temple University's pre-med program. It was no Ivy, but I was proud. I worked my tail off during my freshman year, living at home to save money. I thought things were going okay. Then came that conversation during the summer before my sophomore year. "We can't afford your tuition this semester, sweetheart," my mom said, eyes full of carefully manufactured sorrow. "You'll need to sit out a year, save up, and maybe we can revisit next fall." I nodded. I was devastated, sure. But I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe things were just tight. That it wasn't personal. So I picked up 2 jobs. Weekday shifts at a bookstore near the mall. Weekend nights at Lou's Diner off Route 145. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was a Saturday. I was elbow-deep in dishes at the back of Lou's, still in my apron, fingers pruny from rinsing glasses. I heard a familiar laugh from the front of the diner and felt a chill run down my spine. I peeked around the corner. My heart sank. There they were, my parents and Julian. All dressed up like they were heading to some gala. My mom was in her navy blazer she only wore for important occasions. Dad was beaming, swirling a glass of champagne Lou rarely ever broke out. Julian sat between them, a Yale hoodie draped over his shoulders. I couldn't move. I heard my dad say it clear as day. "Phew. At least one of our kids is worth the investment." I didn't cry right then. I just quietly turned around and went back to scraping grease off plates. But inside, something cracked. Julian was smart, sure. But I didn't think he was any smarter than me. He had a 3.7 GPA and got in on a lacrosse scholarship. I didn't even know they were applying to Ivies for him. Guess I was too busy working double shifts. They didn't know I saw them that night. I didn't say anything. I just kept working, and every time I handed over a grilled cheese or mopped a sticky floor, that sentence echoed in my head. At least one of our kids is worth the investment. By spring, I had saved enough to pay for 1 semester, barely. I reapplied to Temple. My credits were still valid. I was set to return that fall. But I didn't go back. Instead, I moved out. Rented a tiny room in a shared apartment in Philadelphia with peeling paint and water that ran cold half the time. I switched my major from pre-med to computer science and enrolled at a community college while teaching myself front-end development in the evenings. I cut contact with my parents. Not dramatically. Just silence. I blocked them on everything. Over time, I got better, both at coding and at being on my own. I landed an internship at a small startup that turned into a junior developer job. By 26, I was making $95,000 a year, had my own apartment, and had started a small web development business on the side. Meanwhile, Julian flunked out of Yale his sophomore year after his lacrosse scholarship was pulled. My parents spent thousands trying to keep him afloat, but he eventually dropped out. Last I heard, he moved back in with them, jobless, bouncing between projects. Then one rainy afternoon, my dad called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered without thinking. "Hey, Soraya," he said, voice cracked with something that almost sounded like humility. "We heard you started your own business." "That's incredible." I said nothing. There's something we need to ask you. Of course there was. Turns out they'd mortgaged the house to help Julian stay enrolled, and now the bank was coming for it. They were looking for a temporary loan to help them stay afloat. I let them talk. Listened to every word. Then I said the one sentence I'd been waiting years to say: "I'm sorry, but I can't afford to help out right now. Maybe try again next year." I hung up before they could reply. And yes, I cried. Not because I felt bad. Not because I wanted to help them. I cried because it was finally over. The begging. The pleasing. The trying so damn hard to earn love that was never meant for me. Later that month, I went back to Allentown for the first time in 6 years. I didn't visit my parents. I went to Lou's diner. Lou was still there, old and slower now, but sharp. He remembered me. Sat me down at the counter and gave me a grilled cheese, on the house. "I always knew you were going places, kid," he said. That night, I started writing my story. Not for sympathy. Just for closure. And maybe for someone out there who needed to hear it. Today, I run a successful web design firm with 3 full-time employees. I mentor young women in tech and speak at conferences when I can. I never reconnected with my parents. The last I heard, they sold the house and moved to Ohio to be near my mom's sister. Julian works retail and still lives with them. I'm not angry anymore. Sometimes, justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it's just living well when no one thought you could. So if you're reading this and you've ever been the kid who wasn't worth the investment, know this: you don't need anyone's permission to become something extraordinary. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. We just can't afford it this semester," my mom said, sitting across from me at our old oak kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug she hadn't sipped from in minutes. My dad stood behind her, arms crossed. "You can try again next year," he added, like it was a reasonable compromise. Like it didn't gut me. I nodded, not because I understood, but because I had nothing left to say. What was I going to do, beg? That was the beginning of it. Growing up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, I always felt like I was on solid ground, even if it sometimes cracked beneath my feet. We weren't wealthy, but we had a home, 2 cars, and dinner every night at 6. My dad worked for a mid-sized insurance agency in Bethlehem, and my mom was part-time at the library, though she always introduced herself like she ran the place. My younger brother, Julian, was the golden boy. If I got an A, he got a trophy for showing up. If I cleaned the house, he got praised for not making a mess. It was subtle at first, small things. Unequal chores. Birthday parties that felt unbalanced. But I pushed through. I had a plan. Study hard. Get out. Make something of myself. And I was on track. I got into Temple University for pre-med, lived at home to save money. Commuted 2 hours every day and still managed a 3.8 GPA. I thought that would be enough to show them I was worth investing in. But when sophomore year came around, the conversation at the kitchen table changed everything. They said tuition was too expensive. That maybe I could take a semester off. Get a job. Help around the house. "We're all doing our part," my mom said, as if they were struggling to keep food on the table. I didn't question it. I wanted to believe them. So I applied to every job I could. Landed one at the local bookstore, another at a greasy old diner on Route 145 called Lou's. Most days I'd work the bookstore in the afternoon, then switch to the diner by 5 p.m., staying until after midnight when we locked up. I was exhausted, barely sleeping, but I reminded myself it was temporary. Just a year. Just until we could afford my tuition again. Then one Saturday night everything changed. It was a little after 8:30 p.m. A rainstorm had just passed, leaving the diner windows fogged and streaked. We were slow that night. I was wiping down the counter, wondering if we'd close early, when the bell above the door chimed. I glanced up automatically, and stopped breathing. There they were. My mom, my dad, and Julian. My mom wore the navy blazer she only pulled out for parent-teacher meetings or funerals. Dad was freshly shaved, in his best button-up. Julian looked smug in a brand-new Yale hoodie. And in their hands, 3 flutes of champagne, courtesy of Lou, who apparently thought they were old friends celebrating. I stood behind the counter, stunned. I didn't think they even saw me. I'd tied my hair up in a bun, apron stained from hours of cooking grease and coffee splashes. I was invisible. Then my dad raised his glass. To Julian, he said, beaming. At least one of our kids is worth the investment. They laughed. Loud. The kind of laugh you let out when you're genuinely proud of something. It echoed across the diner and landed right in my chest like a punch. I didn't cry. I didn't drop anything. I just turned around and walked back into the kitchen like I was looking for ketchup. Inside, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the edge of the sink. That line kept playing in my head like a broken record. At least one of our kids is worth the investment. That night I finished my shift in silence, barely speaking to the other waitress, barely aware of the people around me. I didn't confront them. What was the point? I already knew where I stood. The next morning, I found Julian's acceptance letter from Yale on the kitchen table, under a pile of celebratory photos, him in front of the university sign, my mom's lipstick on his cheek, a bottle of Veuve on the table. I stared at it for a long time before putting it back. They never mentioned seeing me at the diner. And I never mentioned seeing them. It was a silent pact we all agreed to. But something in me shifted after that night. I kept working both jobs, but I stopped trying to get back into Temple. I didn't want to ask them for anything anymore. Instead, I started researching scholarships, online classes, alternate paths. I quietly changed my major from pre-med to computer science. It was cheaper, more flexible, and I could teach myself the basics online. I enrolled in night classes at Lehigh Carbon Community College. I moved out 6 months later. I didn't make a big deal about it. Just packed my things and signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia. It was small and smelled like mildew in the winter, but it was mine. I paid my bills, studied, and spent my nights building websites for small businesses on Fiverr. Anything I could to keep going. My parents didn't visit. They barely called. I graduated at 25 with a computer science degree and 2 years of freelancing under my belt. By then, I'd built a portfolio that landed me a junior developer job at a fintech startup. It paid $78,000 a year. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Then I got promoted. Then I got recruited. Then, at 27, I started my own web development firm. And still, they didn't know. Because they never asked. But everything changed again when I got a call one evening from a number I didn't recognize. It was my dad. He sounded tired. Maybe older. Maybe just defeated. "Hey, Soraya," he said, like we'd just spoken last week. I said nothing. Waited. We heard you're doing well. That you've got your own company now?" That caught me off guard. I hadn't posted about it. I barely used social media. Maybe Julian found my LinkedIn. Maybe someone from town mentioned it. "That's great," he continued quickly. "Really great. We're proud of you." It sounded like he was trying it out for the first time. Proud of you. Like a phrase from a foreign language he wasn't fluent in. Then he told me the real reason for the call. They were losing the house. They'd taken out loans to help Julian after he got into Yale. And again when he lost his scholarship. And again when he dropped out. He still hadn't found work. And now they were behind on mortgage payments. They needed help. I leaned against the kitchen counter of my Philadelphia apartment, staring out at the rain-soaked street below. I let him finish. Every word. Then I said the only thing I could. "I'm sorry," I told him. "I can't afford to help right now. Maybe try again next year." He went quiet. I hung up before he could say anything else. After I hung up, I just stood there. My phone screen slowly dimmed in my hand as I stared at my reflection in the window. My own voice echoed in my mind, maybe try again next year. I hadn't planned to say those words. They just came out, calm, unbothered, almost casual. But the moment I did, I felt a wave of heat rise up my neck and settle in my chest like boiling water. Not guilt. Not satisfaction, exactly. Just release. I had carried the weight of their silence, their favoritism, their condescension for so long that I almost didn't know what it felt like to set it down. But there it was. I had drawn the line. And it stayed quiet after that. No follow-up call. No angry voicemail. Not even a passive-aggressive message from my mother. Nothing. It was like we had silently agreed, again, not to speak of things. 3 weeks later, I got a Facebook message from Julian. I hadn't blocked him, mostly because I didn't think he'd ever reach out. Julian, I know they called you. I didn't ask them to. Just so you know. I read the message, closed it, and left it on scene. A few days after that, I got another. Julian, look, I know you think they screwed you over. Maybe they did. But I didn't ask for them to pay for Yale either. I didn't want it like that. I didn't even want to go at first. That time, I responded. You didn't have to toast to it. He left it on scene. That was the last we spoke. Life kept going, though. Work stayed busy, almost too busy. I hired 2 interns that summer to help with new clients, and for the first time in my life, I had weekends free again. I started spending my Saturday mornings at Clark Park Market. I bought fresh bread and strawberries and sat on a bench near the fountain with a book I never really read. It was the first time in years I had time to be alone and not feel like I was falling behind. But the silence from my family started to feel like a different kind of noise. It wasn't that I missed them, exactly. It was more like I missed the version of myself who used to believe in them. The girl who studied at the kitchen table while her mom made tea and her dad hummed along to the evening news. I missed that girl because she still thought she mattered equally. She didn't. And that hurt more than I expected, even now. One day, while organizing old files, I found a photo tucked inside my college planner from freshman year. It was me, sitting on the temple lawn, smiling like I had the whole world ahead of me. I stared at it for a long time. What would I even tell her now, if I could? Would I warn her? Would I tell her to expect the toast and the champagne and the silence? Or would I let her believe just a little longer? In late fall, I got an email from an old professor at Temple who had kept in touch after I dropped out. He'd read a blog post I wrote on women in tech and asked if I'd be willing to come back and speak to his students. At first, I hesitated. Going back there felt like reopening a wound. But eventually, I agreed. The day I went back to campus, the air smelled the same, like wet pavement and ambition. I walked through the same hallways, now with a laptop bag slung over my shoulder, heels clicking against the linoleum floors. People held doors open for me. A few even asked for my LinkedIn. The lecture went well. Better than I expected. Afterward, I lingered in the stairwell, staring out a window near the student center. And out of nowhere, I thought of that diner again. Of the champagne glasses. The laughter. It had been almost 4 years since that night. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't need it. But something inside me still itched for something resembling acknowledgement. Not an apology, just recognition. That I had climbed out of the ditch they left me in. That I had done it without them. Later that night, I looked up the house on Google Maps. The listing said it had been sold. The photos were outdated. The tree in the front yard was taller than I remembered, the paint on the porch chipped worse than before. I don't know what I expected. That seeing it would trigger something? That I'd feel triumphant? I didn't. I just felt older. I closed the tab. Then I opened a blank document. I titled it, Things I would have done differently if they'd chosen me, too. But I never typed a word. Because deep down, I knew I wouldn't have done anything differently. Winter came, and with it, the quiet. I hadn't heard from my family in nearly a year since the call. I told myself that was a good thing. That peace was better than forced reconciliation. But there were still moments, passing strangers with the same haircut as my mom, a car that looked like my dad's at the gas station, where I'd feel that old flicker of ache, the kind you don't know where to place. Then one evening, out of nowhere, I got a LinkedIn message from a woman named Riva Patel. She was a hiring manager at a mid-sized insurance company in Bethlehem. The same one where my father had worked for over 20 years. Riva explained that they were looking to modernize their entire digital infrastructure, from their internal portal to their client-facing site. She said she found my portfolio while searching for local developers and was impressed with my work. She invited me to submit a proposal to redesign their full digital presence as an outside contractor. It took me a moment to connect the dots. Wait, my father's company? I clicked through the company page and saw the staff directory. My dad, Martin, was still there, now demoted to a mid-level supervisor role. The company had merged the year prior and had undergone a massive restructuring. I sat back and stared at the screen. I could have declined the invitation. I didn't need the money. But I saw something else in that email, the universe finally knocking, asking if I wanted the mic. So I accepted. I put together the most professional, sharp, forward-thinking proposal I had ever written. I didn't mention my father. I didn't need to. Riva loved it. She brought me in for a Zoom call the following week. I wore a crisp blazer and curled my hair. I looked exactly like the kind of person people wish they had supported from the beginning. The pitch was a success. I was awarded the contract. 2 months later, I walked into the company's headquarters in Bethlehem to begin the onboarding process. It was surreal. The lobby hadn't changed much, same ugly carpet, same reception desk, but this time I walked through it with a badge that said consultant. I met with Riva in a glass conference room overlooking the office floor. She introduced me to a few department heads, and then, without much ceremony, she waved to someone lingering by the hallway. "This is Martin," she said, smiling. "He's been with the company forever. He'll be the liaison on your department's access." He stepped forward. And for a second, the air shifted. My dad stared at me. The same eyes, but dimmer. His hair had more gray in it. He looked thinner than I remembered. But the recognition hit him instantly. There was no mistaking it. "Soraya?" he asked, quietly. I gave a small, polite smile. "Hi, Martin," I said. Riva blinked, glancing between us. "Oh. You two know each other?" "We used to," I said, my tone even. My father didn't respond. His mouth opened like he might, but nothing came out. Riva seemed confused but moved on quickly, diving back into logistics. My father sat beside me for the rest of the meeting, mostly quiet, taking notes. He never brought up the past. And neither did I. Over the following weeks, we exchanged emails, scheduled access permissions, reviewed workflows. Strictly professional. I never slipped. Never showed anger. Never asked him why. Because he knew. And the discomfort in his posture whenever we spoke told me everything. Once, at the end of a long meeting, he stayed behind as the others filed out. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You've done well for yourself." "Thanks," I said, not offering more. He hesitated. "Your mother, she asks about you." I looked him in the eye, steady. "She knows where to find me." That was the last personal conversation we ever had. The project wrapped 3 months later. The launch went smoothly. Riva was thrilled. She offered me a retainer contract for continued support and recommended me to several other corporate clients. I cashed the largest check I'd ever received and used part of it to buy a small condo in Old City, Philadelphia. Hardwood floors, 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows. A place with light. That same week, I donated $10,000 anonymously to the Temple University Scholarship Fund for first-generation women in STEM. I called it the Amin Academic Rebound Fund. And I smiled when I signed the form. I never spoke to my family again. There was no reunion. No forced apologies. Just that one quiet moment when the man who'd said I wasn't worth the investment had to sit in a glass room while I led the show. That was enough. Because revenge, I learned, doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it's just building the life they told you didn't deserve, and letting them watch from the cheap seats.